And now I'd like to call up our good friend and fearless leader, Colleen Hardwick. Come on up, Colleen.
Thanks, Cleta. And I'm here to raise Cain. Thanks. We're switching decks because I like to tell stories with pictures. So how are we doing up there? Here we go. So we're starting off, this is TEAM, a voice for all neighborhoods. Those of you that have been involved with TEAM in the current incarnation from the beginning will remember that we went through a fairly exhaustive branding exercise as we really distilled down what was key about what we were trying to accomplish. And the phrase that we came up with was a voice for all neighborhoods. But now we're living in a city that seems to want to bulldoze all of those neighborhoods and remove any of the characteristics and nuance of the neighborhoods that we've enjoyed since the beginning. And in fact, I spoke to council last week, and every single one of those councillors, whether they were ABC, well, Christine wasn't there, but the Greens, they all have bought into the housing supply narrative. They all believe that it is important, down the torpedoes, to build, 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 more, supply, supply, supply. And if you're in the neighborhoods and you're standing up for your neighborhood, forget about it. And, you know, I grew up believing that neighborhoods were important. Ray Spaxman, who was referred to earlier as a seminal director of planning, talked about neighborliness as mission critical to our neighborhoods and the planning methodology that we used. But all of that is seemingly history now, because if you talk about neighborhoods or community, you're a NIMBY and deride it. And what they don't seem to be able to grasp is that growth is inevitable. I think we'll all agree. It's how you handle it that counts. Are we trying to promote growth, which is generally for profit, or are we trying to manage growth, which means balancing between housing and mobility and community amenities and commercial activity and affordability? Because if we can't afford to live here, what's the point, right? So we haven't drunk the Kool-Aid, and what we have to realize is that the money that Terry referred to, the money that is behind the current council and the current paradigm, is always going to be motivated by profit. And the job of the city is to achieve that balance. So what are we going to do about it? Next slide, please. Well, I think we'll all agree that the state of our democracy in this country is under siege. We've talked about the abolition of the park board here today, and abolishing the park board is undermining our local democracy. It's not about saving millions of dollars. It'll save $18,000 salaries on 7 park board commissioners. It will not save money. What it will do is remove the ability of an elected park board to control land disposition, because that will be transferred to real estate and facilities management. It's all about the land and the money. Meanwhile, at the province level, we've got politicians that have drunk the Kool-Aid, and not only are they on board with this excessive supply narrative, but they believe that it's appropriate to take away public hearings and the ability of our people, the people that live here, our residents that pay their taxes, should not have a voice. It's crazy. It is crazy. It's anti-democratic. It's top-down autocracy is what it is. But the fish rots from the head. And the federal government, again, this goes back the better part of a decade. Those of us that have read the underlying material suggest the federal government were persuaded that targeting 100 million population by the end of the century was a good idea. Not thinking about what jobs or opportunities would greet the people that were coming here, but rather that we should just accelerate immigration to unprecedented levels, ultimately to fund the housing production industry. Now, immigration has always driven population growth in this country. We are all probably descendants of families that came here because we needed farmers, or we needed fishermen, or we needed, loggers. Industry drove immigration. But that's not the case now. It is really driving the housing production industry, the financialization of real estate, and we are not thinking about what we need to do to diversify our economy to support the future economy. So it starts at the federal government. The federal government says we're going to use accelerated immigration as fuel for the housing production industry. The province steps in line and says, damn the torpedoes, we're going to remove any obstacles to development. And our park board iteration is saying, well, we're going to take back control of any land that we can to develop. And you've got to know that they are right in there with Google Earth, down to the parking lot level, identifying every piece of property that can potentially be developed for profit. Now, I will argue in this talk today that we really need to be thinking about other modes of representing our people, because our at-large system is at large, and there is no local representation. And having spent the last 4 years on council, or between 2018 and 2022, I can tell you that nobody listens to our residents. They don't have to. Now, if we look at the federal government or we look at the provincial government, we have ridings with representatives. So if you're in a pickle, you have someone that you can respond to. We don't have that locally. There are no boundaries. And so ironically, there is no representation. Now, Vancouver is the only major Canadian city that doesn't have a ward system. Now, and again, I have to be clear, I'm not advocating specifically for wards at this time, but I think we need to have a discussion, because if we don't have anyone representing the neighborhoods, then again, it's homogenized, steamrolled, and get out of the way. But every major Canadian city across this country does have wards in some way, shape, or form. We are an anomaly here. So what do? The definition of insanity is repeating the same mistake over and over again and expecting a different outcome. That's kind of where we're at right now. If we continue with the system that we are, the money will always win. The money in Vancouver, like all cities, is in the land. The developers develop the land. They're going to put the most money into ensuring that they control it, and that includes controlling the politicians. Right? This is not brain surgery here. So, what are we going to do? What are the alternatives? It's clear, though, that the future of our city is going to be determined by our approach to local democracy and governance. So what are our alternatives? We're just going to run through them here. So our at-large system, again, we've heard a lot of criticism about it over time. It's not representative. It's one size fits all. There's no direct accountability. They're not accessible. Other than me, this is what I was always hearing when I was on council. Colleen, you're the only one that ever responds to us. Anybody? You ever get any responses?
Carrie J. Moses.
Pardon?
Carrie J.
Oh, that was a few councils ago, but with the busy ballot, people didn't understand it. Low voter turnout. We talk about 35% turned out. That means 65% did it. That's stunning. And you have to have money to be able to run. And you have to have a political party behind you. So the critics say, nope, abolished wards back in 1936. This is more efficient and effective. If we think about the city as a whole, you can vote for everybody. You could have more than one councillor you can reach out to that won't talk to you. Yields, this is my favorite quote, yields a strong central government compatible with the needs of the times. So that's door number one. Door number two is a ward system. And again, pros and cons. Yes, it is more representative. We've got people in your neighborhood. They're accountable to you. They're accessible to you. The ballot is simpler and more easy to understand. And if we have, ultimately what I want to see here is that we have a more informed electorate because they're more likely to vote, and equity access of candidates. Cons against, there's this argument that back in the 30s that they were parochial and also that there was corruption. None of this has been evidenced in any of the other cities that I've looked at. That there be political party advantage expensive, well, that's debatable. You can only vote for one candidate, and it weakens existing community groups. I don't think anything could weaken existing groups further. So those are the principal arguments, and I'm going to circulate all of this because I think we really need to start a discussion about what form of governance the city has going forward, because if we keep going the way we're going, there's not going to be any neighborhoods. For those that don't know, the first 50 years of the city was an award system. Terry touched on the amalgamation and the changes that happened after the stock market crash. Largely, it's been said in some of the documents I've read that the ward system was replaced by the at-large at the same time that the NPA was created as a merger between the Liberals and the Conservatives to keep out the communists. But that was very much the mindset of the time. Then we went from the Depression into the Second World War, and out of that, of course, that carried on right up until the 60s with, the civil rights movement and Vietnam War, and we saw a lot of changes 50 years ago in the 70s. It's also been suggested that we have a hybrid system that combines the two. This was the recommendation in 1979 when, again, we expected that we would have seen a ward system or some semblance thereof by now. Even if we don't have a system that elects people within neighborhood boundaries, we used to have a system that focused on neighborhoods. We had neighborhood planning, we had neighborhood integrated services teams, and instead of this NIMBY rhetoric that plagues us today, there was still a strong sense that community planning mattered. I want to point out another solution that we've seen in other jurisdictions. In Los Angeles, they have Empower LA. They have elected neighborhood councils. The councilors are voluntary. They don't get paid, or maybe they're paid a minor stipend. But even though they don't have the ability to make the kind of fiduciary responsibility decisions around finance and around things like land use change, they, in and of themselves, reflect on neighborhoods. They are saying that we think it's important to reflect back the characteristics of the neighborhoods to the larger city. And again, I am not advocating for one model or another, but I think we need to have this discussion. Otherwise, we can kiss our neighborhoods goodbye. Empower Vancouver. We need an antidote for what's ailing our city. And I believe very strongly that that antidote has to include local representation, because without it, the money will continue to steamroll the city for its profit. And the rest of us can just continue to pay our taxes. Thank you very much.